Hey guys, Bill Blanchard here, and today I want to discuss a Pixinsight pixel math process that I created that allows you to transfer RGB stars over to a narrowband image. Now this has been a hot topic as of late on social media and online forums, so I figured the timing was right for me to put out some math that I've been working on for the past year that allows you to do this process, get it into your hands, get it tested, and you guys let me know how well it works for you. For the tests that I've done, it actually works out really well. I've tested on many different targets of many different brightnesses, color profiles, and the star color that transfers over and the star shape looks really nice, and I think that you guys will really enjoy this process, and I really hope that it's something that can help your astro processing needs moving forward. And a recent video that I did with Luke on Luca Matico's channel, and also Sean with Visible Dark, we discussed a pixel math process that I created that allows you to do star reduction. A few of the viewers asked whether or not I had a process available for this RGB star to narrowband transfer, and the answer is yes, I do. So I do want to apologize for the length of this video. It's because I do go over a large segment of math. So if you don't really care about that part, I'm sure the first 30% of the video will get you going. But if you do watch the rest of it, which I highly recommend that you do, you will understand how I designed the pixel map the way I did, some of the images that I created, and hopefully that'll kind of get your brain going on some of the things that you can do in pixel math. So to get started, if you look in the description, there's a download link, which is going to give you the download for my process. And all you do is just drag this over onto your workspace in Pixinsight, and here you go. Now, if you're familiar with how I designed the pixel math in the star reduction process, you'll see that there's some similarities, but we've got another tool here. So what I've done is I've created two tools, and basically what this does is, let me open up this RGB image here and this show image here of the Orion Nebula. Now, the reason why I chose the Orion Nebula is because this is a very difficult target to do this transfer. The reason why is because the RGB data is nearly as bright as that of the narrowband. So when you're typically doing, say, an emission nebula or something like that, when you do your RGB stars, you might be doing it at a lower exposure, and you're not going to bring out that nebulosity like you would in a show image. But when you're dealing with, say, an image like this, in which you can create a show image out of, you gotta deal with this brightness. So some of the methods that are currently out there right now actually don't really handle this very well, and I'll explain during the process of this video, and I'll show you how I have gone around some of these limitations to be able to create a really good transferred image. So to get back to the processes here, what we're going to do is we're going to be creating, this is a tool that actually creates a clone of my RGB, so I can minimize that. And this is going to create a clone of my narrowband, so I can minimize that. Basically what this does, it just allows us to create the file naming structure, which we're going to use for the process moving forward. Now, if you do have StarNet 2 or Star Exterminator, these are the two main processes that I recommend for doing star removal on these two images. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this over, and then I'm going to pause the video so that it runs, and then we'll pick up after it's done. So as you can see, we have our RGB image with stars and our newly created images, which is the RGB image that's starless and the show image that is starless. So this process is actually simple. You can just, if the file structure is what it is right here, then by default you can just drag this icon over here, and it's going to create your new show image with RGB stars. But to open this up, so if you kind of compare back to the way I designed the pixel math for the star reduction, this is very similar, but we have another image name that has to be entered in here. So this is the image name right here for the RGB starless, and this is the one for the narrowband. Now this M5, what is that? Okay, so I've actually created 4 different methods of doing this RGB star transfer. And if you wanted to test them out individually, you just test out like one for method 1, you just drag that over 2, 3, or 4. 5 is actually just a blend. That's default. The blend I actually like, and if you want, just keep it on the blend, but if you wanted to try something else, you can. And during the process of this video, I'll show you in the event that you wanted to change some things, different blending options, you can just modify it in the code itself. But default, this works. So yeah, so I'm just going to drag this over, and it's going to create our new show image with RGB stars. Now, if you start zooming in, you can see that we got our blue stars. We got some yellow stars in here. Let me go to a different area here. So here you got some yellow stars. So the color is actually transferred over quite nice, and it's very natural. These stars look very natural, and the brightness is all preserved, and also the star color is preserved. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you another example on the Wizard Nebula, and then you can get another idea of how well it works here. The Orion Nebula, again, it's very bright, so when you look here in the trapezium, you can see that we actually retain the brightness in the star color. So if we compare it to the star colors here, it's there. Now again, this is a very bright target, so I'll do some comparisons on another target. So let me get that ready. Alright, so here's the Wizard Nebula. Now this is some RGB data that I just collected, and I oversaturated the stars just to bring out the color. But you can see there's a lot of blue stars, a lot of yellow stars, and I did the same process. I created a starless image, and then I have my starless show image over here. Now the naming structure is a little different right here from the default, and that's just because I'm doing this video and I'm having multiple examples. But all you do is I can double click this, Control C to copy, Control V, do the same thing here, bring it over here, and now I can transfer this over, and now you can see that we have our new image. So let's zoom in and take a look. So you can see we got nice, beautiful yellow stars and big bright blue stars here. Now when we go into a bright area, now this is actually very high in brightness. If you look at the blues, I mean, they're really up there. It's almost saturated. I got so much blue in here. But you can see that you can still see yellow colors. And we got blue stars, yellow stars, and they all look very natural. You can go into these areas here. You got a nice yellow star there and some blue stars. Same thing down in here, some yellow stars. So the transfer actually works really well. Now, the cool thing about this is because you already have this, so if you did download my star reduction routine, you can actually do it after the fact. And I'll show you an example of that towards the end of this video. But for right now, I just kind of wanted to show you that the star colors came over, and they're very natural, and yeah, it looks really good. Now we have to discuss the math, and this is going to be the part that's hopefully you guys watch. And again, I'm sorry if it bores you, but it's very important. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back to the Orion Nebula, which is going to give you a good idea as to why some of these other methods don't work. All right, so what I've done is I've created a couple little simple math tools that's going to allow me to illustrate why some of these methods don't work. The first method is one that is subtracting stars from the image with stars from the image without stars, and then adding them back to this image. And the reason why this doesn't work is if you go into an area of high nebulosity and it's very bright, when you subtract one from another, you're not really left with much. And then if you try to add it onto something brighter, you will blow out your stars. It won't look right. So let me just copy this name here. So this is just something that I created. So it's going to be the $T, which is the target image, minus image 1, which image 1 is the starless. So as you can see, it created stars. Now you're probably already familiar with this process when you do like StarNet, because StarNet, it'll actually create a star mask. That's basically the math right here. Now if you're using Star Exterminator, they have that same process here where it does the minus stars, but they also have a process called Unscreen stars. And that's just a different math formula, and I will describe that here in a minute, because that's a big thing that you guys really need to know and understand about that, because there's a big misconception out there, and I definitely want to get that clarified. So for right now, we created an image called minus stars. So if you look at an area here, and yeah, please ignore my halo. But anyways, let's just go to this area here. So we got an area that has background values that are very close to that of black. I mean, there's nothing there, empty space. So when you subtract something from an area that is black, I mean, yeah, you're going to get, you're going to get a nice, nice looking star. But if you go to the area, let me go to this area here in the trapezium area, and we go to here. So if I subtract this from something that's already bright, you're left with this, very dim stars. And not only are they dim, they're very jacked up in color. I mean, look, there's so much green in this star, and this is just simple mathematics. I mean, if you subtract one from another, you can't assume that you're subtracting the star color. It's a big misconception. You're actually subtracting the difference. So if you go back to, like, when you look at the RGB image of the wizard, you can see that the nebulosity is quite low. So if you do the subtraction here, you probably will have your yellow stars and blue stars, and same thing when you do the unscreening. But when you have bright nebulosity like this, it doesn't work. And if you try to add this back onto here, obviously you're basically going to be creating this image here. But what if we wanted to add these stars back to here? Okay, so now to add the stars onto this image, this is what happens. So we're just going to take this line here, which is the image with stars, and we're just going to add it to this target image, which is going to be our starless. So what you see now is, because the brightness of this image before is so much brighter than here, when you zoom in, you can see that we've blown out the stars. I mean, they're oversaturated, they look like crap. But then when you go into here, I mean, these stars, they're really jacked up in color. I mean, they're like green and just really messed up, and they're also blown out. The reason why is because when you subtract this from this to get this, you're left with that difference. So if you're trying to add it onto a different color profile and different brightness, it doesn't work. I mean, it looks horrible. So the other process that people have been doing is, so let me just move this minus stars out of the way, and is this process here. So this is, let me just zoom in a little bit. So this is the unscreen stars. And again, you're familiar with that process here, which is now in Star Exterminator. So what this does is it's going to take the inverse image of this, and it's going to divide it by the inverse image of this to create a new star image, in which we're inverting back right here. So just to illustrate, let me do the same thing here. Enter in the new file name, drag this over. So as you can see, it created our stars. Now, if we do some comparisons, let me drag this out of the way, bring back our minus stars. And if we look at this area here, let me just move this over a little bit so that we're looking at the original stars, we're looking at the minus stars. So these look very identical because the background is almost close to black. Now, if we go into the trapezium area, let me share that, and then I'm going to share this. Now you can still see, on the minus stars we already talked about, the stars are really messed up. Here the brightness is more preserved, but if you really look at it, the color it's even worse. This is a very ugly star. It's not even the star color that it needs to be. So, when you look at the minus star, the color profile, it's a lot lower in luminosity, but it's still an incorrect color. So when you're doing the unscreen stars, you have to understand that you're not getting your true color in areas of where you're subtracting it from nebulosity. So one of the processes that I do in my math is I actually recreate the actual star, but it actually has the real star color. So that's the big difference. But So to kind of drag this back out of the way, so now that we have our stars, so one of the processes that you can do to add stars back to an image is just you inverse the math. So instead of we were dividing before, now we're going to multiply. So here, this is now our star image name, and my file name is stars1. So if I actually drag this over to the my new platform, so if this is my old one, if I wanted just to bring it back to the old one, you'll see that it's identical, right? So let me undo that. So what if we brought it over to the new platform? Okay, so now the advantage of doing it this way is that you don't blow out your stars. But the disadvantage is yeah, over here in the areas of low nebulosity, it looks like the star transfer or the color is right, but it's actually not. So like if you look at this area here, this is a very dim yellow star in this area here. If you look at this data here, now we got a blue star, okay? The reason why is, let me undo this, and let me move and make some room here, is again, this color profile is completely different from this one. So you can't just take unscreened stars and then kind of like a reverse screening and bring them back into a new image and have stars that are the right color. You just can't do it. So one of the methods that I have in my math is I am making an attempt on at least two of the methods to correct that star color change, so that when I bring it over, it's going to be more color corrected. Okay, so to further illustrate this more, we're going to jump over into Excel, and I'm going to show you how the math works. Now, as you can see, we have a yellow star here on a almost black background, and the profile of a yellow star is going to be higher in red, then green, then blue. So that's just what makes it yellow when it comes to RGB colors. And if you look at a cross-sectional view of a yellow star, it'll look like this. Here you got your black background, but then you got reds, your greens, and then your blues. Now, a yellow star on nebulosity is still going to hold this profile shape here, the reds, greens, and blues, but the profile here of nebulosity, let's just say it's higher in reds, higher in blue, and then green, similar to that of like this right here, where it's higher in reds, higher in blues, lower in greens. So if we go back to here, let's just say we have that very similar profile. So by doing a starless, we're actually removing the stars, but kind of filling in the areas where you don't have stars. We're just kind of filling it in. But if you subtract this from this, you're left with this. Now, if you look, now we're higher in green, then red, then blue. So that was identical to what we saw on the minus stars, okay? So that's what we have here. Now, when you start talking about unscreened stars, this is what an unscreened star looks like. So as you can see, the brightness is a lot higher. It's just a little bit less than the brightness of the original star. But mathematics are mathematics. I mean, just because you're taking the inverse of this to the inverse of this doesn't mean that you're going to have this profile. In fact, if you look, it's really messed up. We're higher in greens and then reds and then lower on blues. So it's completely different from here. Okay, so let me just drag this out of the way. So let's just say, so this is our narrowband image, and actually these are the same values. I just have the same values because I wanted to show you that if you add this star back to the original value, which is equal to this, you get this. And same thing with the unscreening. If we then multiply the unscreened stars by the inverse of this image, it brings it all back. But what if we kept the same color profile, but we increased the brightness? So let's double this. Let's make this 0.8, and we're going to increase green to 0.5, and then increase this to 0.7. So same color profile, just brighter. Now, as you can see, when you add this back to something that's already higher, you blow out the stars. But what's weird is if you look, red's higher, then blue, then green. So even though we've just increased the brightness, but when you add something back in, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a yellow star. It just doesn't work that way. And then when you unscreen it, you can see that we can kind of control the brightness as where we were at before, but look at it here. Red, then blue, then green. So now you don't have a yellow star, you've got something that's, you know, yeah, just completely jacked up. But that's what happens even with brightness. So if there are ways where, and I know some guys are doing it online, where you can actually just take the luminance from your newly created image and then place it on your RGB image and then take the stars that way. That way you're doing a, having the same luminance to bring it over. It'll work if the color profile is identical, but it's not, because a narrowband image might be, say, 0.5, could be higher in green, 0.6. Let's just say it's lower in blue, 0.4. Now, as you can see here, by adding them back, the star color is completely messed up, and it's messed up over here when you bring it back into the reverse screening. So the only way that you can correct this is if we look at our unscreened star or this. So based on the changes between this starless image here and the changes of this narrowband image, we have to correct this star, or we have to slightly correct this starless image, so that when we bring this back in, it actually has this profile, but on this platform. That's what we have to do. All right, so back to Pixinsight. So I'm gonna move the minus stars and the unscreened stars out of the way, and let's get into the math. So if we scroll down here, you'll see that I've got a ton of math, and there's a lot going on here, so I do kind of want to explain some of these steps. So yeah, let's dig in. One of the things that you'll notice is, you know, I use a lot of symbols, and the reason why is because I have a lot of different images that are actually created within this math. The first thing that you'll see is we got an S value. That's part of this whole MTF thing. So MTF, this is, it's controlling a stretch. And you can see that I'm controlling a stretch. I'm actually inversing a stretch of the target image, which would be this, and I'm also doing it to this, and also doing it to this starless image here. So if I wanted to run just one, you know, like the E1 segment of this code, I can just come down here, type in E1, drag this over, and it's going to run that line. So as you can see, this is an inverse stretch of this image here. So the first part of this is you're going to see that I've got the inverse stretch of these three images, and then I've got the unscreening of a reverse stretch. So this is an unscreened stars, but we're doing it kind of back at a linear state. The reason why, if I jump back to Excel, is, you know, when you have values that stretched, I mean, you know, these values here, the separation, it's like, it's kind of like you're losing contrast between the top of your star to where the base is. So whereas here, this is kind of what it would look like if it was still linear, where the background hasn't been stretched. All the values are very close to 0, but then you still have your star core. So when you go back to this, when I do the unscreened stars back at near linear state, it actually preserves a little bit more of the star color. It's not perfect, but it's close. So let me show you. So because this is reverse stretch, I'm actually just going to copy this line of code, and the unscreened reverse stretch right here is E4. So I'm just going to come down here, I'm going to paste this in, I'm going to take the inverse of that so I can stretch it back, and I'm going to type in E4. So if I drag this over, it's going to create the unscreened stars. So it's going to do the math in a linear state, and then it's going to stretch it back. So if we look at the unscreened stars before to what it looks like now, you can see that the brightness is higher, but that's okay because we handle that later on in the math. But if you look at the star color, now it is a little bit higher. All the other values, if you look at over here, the green is like, I don't know, 20% higher than the other values. Here, it's just a a fragment under. So it's kind of gray color, I don't know. But it's a lot closer. It's not perfect, but some of the other stars tend to pop out, but they're more color corrected than what they would be, you know, over here, which is just the wrong colors. So by doing the reverse stretch, I was able to retain a little bit more of the colors of the stars and then stretching it back. So back to this, you can see, so this is the value. You don't really need to change this S value. This is going to control the strength of the stretch. I would just leave it as default. And so that's what E1, 2, 3, and 4 kind of do. E5, this is actually unscreened stars, but just in its nonlinear state. So if I run this, you'll just get the unscreened stars. Now, one of the things that you're going to see a lot in this math is I'm actually creating it's kind of like a pseudo luminance. I'm actually just taking the mean of the RGB channels to create a luminance. So this would be an RG mask. So if I type in, say, E6 and run this, you're going to see that it's going to create a grayscale image of this. Okay. So this is a luminance. We're actually going to use this to multiply against for when we scale things. Okay, so that's number 6. Number 7, that's the luminance of this, and this is the luminance of this. Okay, and E7 is the luminance of E5, which is the unscreened stars. Okay, so I use that later on. So remember the formula that I said it doesn't really work in terms of star colors, where you're actually taking the unscreened stars and then and reversing it back onto your new image. Well, I'm doing that in this math here, the transfer mask, and then what I'm doing is because I'm using the luminance, I'm actually creating a luminance transfer. So the image before was the luminance of this, so now I'm going to create what the luminance would look like if these stars were transferred over to here. So that would be E10. I will shoot off E10. And you can see that's what the star luminance would be of E10. Or would be if we transfer the stars over. Why does that matter? Because if I have the luminance of this and I divide it by the luminance of this, I actually have a scaling factor that I'm going to use later on in the formula. This is going to help me control the brightness of this whole transfer process. I use it on modes 3 and 4. Well, actually, that's not true. I actually use it on all 4 modes, but you'll see as I get onto the actual modes where the differences come into play. Okay, so that was a transfer mask. Over here, this is actually just a scaled image. So because we're creating these transfer masks, this is actually kind of neat. So this is actually going to create a scaled image of this. This is actually used in mode 4. So I'm going to fire off E11. And when I get into mode 4, you'll understand, and I'll just kind of move the image to the side. So this right here is actually this image, but at this luminosity. So we're going to use that later, and I'll explain why. But that's kind of how, by you creating these masks, how you can control the brightnesses. Okay, so let's go to the next part. And this is where we get a little bit creative. E12, 13, 14, and part of 15 is I'm actually creating a star mask. And by taking the star mask, so for example, I'm gonna delete this segment here and run E15. If I drag this over, you can see I created a star mask. Now the star mask is blown out, but it's supposed to be because I need 1s. Okay, and anything that's not a 1 is going to be tapered down. So this is a star mask, so I'm going to delete this, hit undo to bring this in. Now if I take that mask and multiply it by my stars, go back to E15, you can see that not only do I have my stars, but they're identical in color. But if I go to the trapezium now, you can see that if we go and share this view, see the brightness values are still here, but also the color values. So that's the actual color value of the star. This is the actual color value. If I was to, look at this value here, this little guy right here, which is that small little yellow star, that's right here. So by masking it, now I've actually got the actual brightness of the star and the actual color of the star. Now, the only difference between this and the actual star is maybe it might be that the shape of the star might be slightly different, but that's okay, because we're going to now mold it back to that luminance that I was talking about earlier. So E15 is actually creating a star color using the actual stars themselves by multiplying this image by the mask. Okay, so now let's get into the methods. So method 1, you can see that whereas we were dealing with the reverse stretch, now I'm actually stretching it back to where it needs to be. E4 is the reverse stretch of the unscreened stars. So E3 is the reverse stretch of the this image here, the narrowband image. So kind of like the math that I showed earlier when I was talking about the unscreening and how you add it back. Well, I'm actually doing it, but what I'm doing here is I'm modifying the actual color of this star based on the ratio difference between this and this. So that's kind of how I'm color correcting. Okay, so this is actually, this transfer 1, which is method 1, is actually using the unscreened stars, but the unscreened stars are being color corrected by the ratio difference between this and this. Mode 2 is it's the same type of transfer process, but it's actually just dealing with subtraction and multiplication, similar to the minus stars and adding stars, where I'm subtracting the stars from this image, from this image to this, and then I'm multiplying it by the ratio difference between this and this before I finally add it back onto here. Okay, so that's what that looks like. So if I actually just go back to this and say fire off mode 1, this is what the first transfer method looks like. So you can see we got our stars colors here, we got some yellow star here, and over here we have natural star colors coming through. It's very bright, but if we dig into the actual RGB numbers, they're very close to where they need to be over here. Mode 1 and mode 2 they're nearly identical. They're slightly different just because the way I'm handling the math is slightly different. So that's mode 1 and 2. Mode 3 and 4. Okay, so this is completely different. So instead of transferring values mathematically, I'm actually doing, it's a type of screening and exclusion process where I'm actually excluding the stars from this image, and then I'm doing a reverse screening by bringing in the colors back in. So to let me explain, I am going to, before I jump into this, so image 2 is obviously this image here, because that's image 2, okay? And E9, so E9 is that star mass that I was talking about. So if I just run E9, and I kind of showed this earlier, but I'll just show it real fast. That's just like a grayscale of the unscreened stars. Okay, so that's just and you can't really use this as a mask because the values aren't 1, therefore it won't bring over 100% of the star color over here. It'll actually be dimmer. So that's why when I create these masks here, they have to be blown out, but they got to be blown out where they look, somewhat natural. But yeah, going back to E18, so this right here, so if I take this image and multiply it by the inverse of that star mask, we get this. So in the areas in which we will have stars, now they're gone. Okay, I've completely removed the areas in which we had stars. So if I go back to, say, this image, let me zoom in. So the areas in which I actually have star color here, I'm going to fill it in, but it's going to be the natural star color, not the unscreened stars. Okay, and by bringing that back into a screening process, yeah, I'm going to be able to retain that natural color. So mode number 4, it's very identical to mode number 3. The difference is we're going back to E11, and if you recall, E11 was, let me delete some of these images over here. Remember how we like changed the luminosity of this image to match this? So now what I'm doing is I'm actually taking the stars, blowing them out of here, and then adding them back into the screening process. So it's a method of doing it, you know, with the original image, and then I'm also doing it to an image that's lower matched luminosity. Then I'm reversing the luminosity back to this luminosity here. That's where these luminosity masks come into play. So the luminosity mask here, so this is a mask of 16, this is a mask of 17, 18, and 19. So if I take the transfer mask, which was what it would look like with the stars here, and if I divide it by the masks of methods 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and then multiply it by the data, I get a luminosity corrected final outcome. So if I type in E24, I'm getting a luminosity corrected image, okay, and it's going to have the nice star colors. So that's going to be mode 1. Now I can go through mode 2, mode 3, and mode 4. So mode 1 and 2 they're near identical. We're just transferring over the values. But if you wanted to see mode 3, which is E26, so this process of removing the stars and then screening them back in and controlling the luminosity, this is like mode 3 is like probably my favorite method, because the star colors they're really good. I mean, if you look at this area here, I mean, that is the same profile as that star. The star colors, I mean, they match. If I come over here, you know, I've got a yellow star in here, and if you look at the brightness and you look at the colors, you know, they're there. I mean, the values, the numerical values match, and therefore, you know, the star colors is going to match as well. So yeah, mode 3 is like my favorite. Mode 4 on this nebula, you won't really see much of a difference, but it actually preserves the star color is even better. But there is going to be a downside, and I'm going to show you that here in a minute. So as you can see, we got really good star values here coming through. And if you look, I mean, there's no artifacts or anything. I mean, the star colors are popping through, and I got all these crazy colors happening in here. It looks very natural. So on this nebula, it looks really good because, you know, there's a lot of nebula here. Therefore, the transfer, it works a lot better when it's here. When we go back to, say, the Wizard Nebula, where the RGB subtraction is a lot lower, you do see a minor artifact with that mode 4 math, and I will show you that right now. But before I show you that, let me just delete this and delete this, and that's my new stars. So what I have here is the blend. Now I'm taking the median, and what you see here is I went ahead and I'm actually taking the mean of modes 1 and 2 because this process, the mathematical process, it's very identical. So the results they're almost the same. Okay, but I'm taking the median which the median is kind of like an outlier rejection. So if you actually kind of go back to your stacking software like DSS or APP, if you have images less than say 20 when you stack, it typically recommends that you do the median. Well, the median is going to naturally kick out outliers, right? So if I have one star, I've got a narrowband image with star color here, then I got another method here and another method here. But I've also included this image, which is, you're probably thinking, oh, that's going to get blended in. Well, actually it doesn't, because if the star colors on modes 1, 2, 3, and 4 match this, these values here will support the blend, but these values here that are different from here, they actually get rejected out. It's just the way math works when you're dealing with taking the median. So for example, and just to show you that there's no degradation, when we bring this over, so this is a blend of all the modes, and it really is the best of all of them. I mean, that right there, I mean, the star colors are there. This image here is supporting these star colors. I mean, it's all here. You don't have any funky looking colors. The colors are, they're there, they're preserved. And to further show that, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back over to the Wizard Nebula, and we'll just take a quick final look using this, and then we'll kind of end this video. All right, so back over to the Wizard Nebula. I'm going to change this back to my last line. That way it executes my switch, which is going to activate this right here. Change this back to a blend. Actually, before I do that, so I want to show you, mode 3, which is my favorite mode. And I need to change these names again because I just swapped back. Okay, so I'm going to run mode 3, and again, this is kind of my favorite one. So if you look at these stars, the star colors here, you got the nice blue coming through, and then back over here, you got the yellow stars that are kind of popping through this really bright area of blue, similar to what I showed you guys earlier. But this is mode 3. So I'm just going to name it like mode 3. And just to show you mode 4, and just to show you the colors that come through are, I mean, they're like perfectly matched to these colors here, but you will see a slight artifact. And you can see how these colors come through really nice as well. But let me run mode 4. Share the view, name it mode 4. Now you can see here, now you may not mind this. In fact, you can even blend this mode with this mode. So, but if you look here, you can kind of see it's a slight little ring, but it's all taste, but it actually does bring some contrast. It does separate that yellow star from that blue background. So I actually kind of like it. And even if you mix modes 3 and 4 together in its own separate blend, it'll make for a really good image. But I really like the contrast by creating that separation. And I'm creating that separation just by excluding that star, and it's kind of giving you that almost like a 3D feel of when you bring these back. But if you look at these star values, I mean, they match 100%. But yeah, I mean, all I got to do is run mode 5. This is actually going to be the blend, and the blend is, again, it's very good. It's this image with the other two in there as well. Share the view. This is mode 5. So you can see, it has a slight, just a slight separation, but it just makes that star kind of pop out from that background. Otherwise, it's going to get somewhat lost. So anyways, you have these different modes to work with whether or not you want to use a blend or whether or not you don't. And if you want to change your blend, you can change it here. You know, so for example, if I didn't want to like blend modes 1 and 2, and I just wanted to run a mead of all of them, you know, a median of them, you know, you can run it that way and you can just save it. So you can create your own blends, but I kind of like this slightly, but 3 is probably my favorite. You know, this is actually kind of nice too because it actually does make a bit of a pop. But and I will say that if you don't blend 1 and 2 together, I still think that the color correctness of modes 3 and 4, they're just better than 1 and 2. So I do suggest just kind of like going with you know, by blending modes 1 and 2 and then doing the median blend with 3 and 4. It works pretty good. So kind of going back to, I'm just going to delete this and delete this. Let's just say we're taking mode 3. So now that I have this image here, and we know that we have this image because that's what we used to help create this, I can now go to my star reduction, and you can see here, and all I got to do is take my starless name, paste it on here, come back over here, drag this over, and boom, now I have my star reduction. And if you look, you know, you can see nice yellow stars, some red stars, kind of come back up here, you know, I got my yellow stars, and then, you know, I still have my yellow stars down in here. So smaller stars, but I have the color. But yeah, I think I've wasted a lot of time here explaining this, but I wanted to be, you know, pretty detailed in kind of how this works. But yeah, again, in the description is the download links for this RGB transfer process, and also I put the link for the star reduction. So if you wanted to bring both in, you can. But yeah, that kind of sums up how this works. And please give it a shot. If you have any comments, leave them in the comment section. And constructive criticism, you know, I love it. So if there's something that can be improved, that's awesome. I mean, this is not about me. This is about you guys, and it's about creating something that's just going to help our astro processing get better. And if someone can actually go through this and say, hey, or not this, but say, you know, these lines, and hey, we can actually make this better, man, that is awesome. And I highly encourage it. So again, sorry for the detailed explanation here, but you understand a little bit more about what I'm doing here and why I made it detailed. And hopefully it will help you make this process even better. So again, thank you for watching this, and I will be posting more videos on some other processing techniques as well. And yeah, I kind of look forward to it. So anyways, we'll talk to you later.